viewpoints, really, by way of debate and conversation. I think that point about, you know, never waste a crisis, as it were, that it's forced improved relationships where they weren't there or developed them further. I think that's really important. Question is, how do we carry that on? Because when crises go, and I think somebody said, I think it was Lorraine, how do we not revert back to type? And it seems to me that local government, whatever its political colour, is often conservative with a small c. So I want to be aware of that. Those big nationals like the BRC suddenly realising what local infrastructure is. And my spin-off was, how do big nationals relate to local infrastructure and local structures and see themselves as part of that voluntary sector, not somehow separate from it? Movement. It's not a national providing services for others. It's a much more of a circle. And I want to build on that. That's really critical. I think suddenly governments clocked infrastructure, but as you were all often saying, how long that will last, I don't know. Place and geography, that whole debate around tier 3, particularly Andy Burnham, as we're in the Northwest, but also Merseyside as well. That question about how the local has been stripped of resource and power, and where does the voluntary sector sit in that, in a reworking of government, devolution, that whole agenda, which is where voluntary sector Northwest started. Where is power, essentially?
I don't disagree with anything any of the speakers have said. We've all known for a long time that infrastructure has been grossly undervalued and grossly underestimated in its potential to transform local areas and just to keep local areas going as well. What I would have done during COVID, and I don't think I would have done anything different to what any of you have said on this call about the need to being responsive, to being reactive, and actually being there for the beneficiaries and the communities that you're supporting. And I think infrastructure has shown its value during this period. And that's partly our fault. The reason why the lottery has not invested in infrastructure is because we've let them seize the argument about where voluntary activity should be. So we've had loads of experimentation around volunteering, around neighbours helping one another. We've had the big society coming in through the back door. And slowly we've seen this amplified through mutualism at the moment and mutual aid. And which is why I think actually Danny Kruger's report is an absolute disaster for the sector. I think there's recommendations in there that's set to divide and break our communities, and we need to be fully aware. And end on the note that I think now is a time for infrastructure to shine. I think there are huge potentials, but I think we need to build on the success that's happened already, and full credit to everybody on this call who's been doing some fantastic work as well. Thank you, Warren.
I think this crisis has, for some, I think, really thrown into question whether social enterprise is viable in a lot of places. And what I mean by that is that, a lot of charities, in my experience, were told, diversify your income, set up trading arms, be more business-like, mimic what the private sector does. And they've adopted these social enterprise models. Then when push comes to shove, they found themselves not only unable to get access to a lot of charitable support, but also unable to get access to private sector support. Impacted the social enterprise sector. And I think for infrastructure, what role does then it play in helping to sift through some of that and support those transitions and adaptations in business models? I mean, one of the things that we've picked up from our research into the sector is at least half of social enterprises have had to fundamentally change their business model because of COVID, and the majority of those are never going to go back to what they did before. So there's a huge opportunity for infrastructure to support, develop, and create new solutions and ideas. And I'm not in the social enterprise space, certainly, but I'm not sure necessarily whether we're in a position really to have the capacity to do that. Infrastructure takes a big, should get a lot of credit for that business grant support, particularly because I know, talking to social enterprises, it's local brokerage on the ground, helping people to identify the key stakeholders that they should be engaging with, that's enabled them to get access to that funding. So I think that kind of issue of, how do we better support organizations to be resilient is going to be critical, because I don't think that COVID is going to be the last crisis we face. The short-term support, actually maybe organizations, particularly in the social enterprise sector, are better able to weather that. But now in the medium term, as we get into the long tail of this crisis, actually this is where infrastructure can step up perhaps. And perhaps we often kind of rush a bit like lemmings immediately towards the crisis to try and solve it, when actually maybe as infrastructure we should be stepping back and trying to think, anticipating 6, 9, 12 months down the line, how we can support organizations once that immediate support's gone away.
We went into this crisis with a huge gap in understanding and a huge gap in the relationship between government and the sector, to the extent that they just did not see us as part of the solution. I accept that that's different at local level, but certainly at national level, I am still of the opinion that whenever government sees a problem like test and trace, the first thing that comes into its mind is Serco. It doesn't think about the role of civil society or sort of charities. When the economic crisis hit us in 2008, and we did huge amounts of lobbying on behalf of the sector, I think we came out with £50 million. We came out with £750 million this time, and okay, it's not going to be spent in the ways as well as we think it could have been done, but we only managed to do that because we came together, and we must remember that lesson going forward. We are not as good as we think we are, or we thought we were, maybe the better language, when it comes to supporting those organisations, because we're not as approachable as we want to be. So we've got some more thinking to do about what is the sort of infrastructure that's needed, and that's very much come to light in this campaign. When you have the lottery, for example, where it's not receiving as many applications from Black and minority ethnic organisations as you would expect given the need, it's not because those organisations are not very good at applying. I think we've been extremely good in this crisis in terms of collaborating around campaigning. I think we've been less good at we've been less good at collaborating around service delivery. And I think that's especially between the national and the local. And again, it's almost like the point about the relationship with government. This hasn't just happened overnight, but over time, something has sort of broken down a bit in terms of the internal relationships that we have in our sector. And something's not quite working between the national and the local. I think Garth picked this up in his comments below about the emergencies partnership. So there's something that we've got to do in terms of going forward. I don't think we should be shy about making the case that too much infrastructure, it's not just underfunded, but it's the wrong type of funding. And I think we've got to make the case that actually, if you want infrastructure organisations to be the glue in communities that are doing things like supporting people to volunteer and get involved, some of the funding streams that we've got to support us aren't matching the activities that those same funders want us to do. Coordination as an activity is much more involved and detailed than networking, and you have to fund and resource coordination if you want that